Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry we're in of writing and self-publishing. Today, we are delighted to have a man from my own homeland, Michael Coolwood, who is a disabled non-binary author who is here to talk to us all about invisible and visible representation of disabled people. I'm very, very excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael. Where are you based?
London, the Isle of Dogs.
Isle of Dogs, beautiful.
Yeah.
With fewer dogs there than is advertised.
Oh, mate, you would be surprised. But there were a lot of lockdown dogs. Yeah. And then it's because we have just so much housing on the island, which was designed for bankers, and then a lot of the banks moved away because Brexit, and now they've all been filled up with people who want to actually live there, and a lot of them have dogs, and it's amazing.
I love that. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well. Thanks, Roland. And thank you for coming on, Michael.
Yeah.
As Roland said, this is a great topic because, this is something that a lot of authors, I think, struggle with in terms of, if they want to represent disability in their books, they're unsure how to do it. And, for somebody with a disability, it might seem easier. I don't know if easier is the right word, but in the sense that you probably don't feel like you have as much chance of getting it wrong and offending people, right? Whereas somebody who might want to portray a disabled character, they would be maybe concerned that they are not getting it right, and so then they'd want to employ sensitivity readers or such like that. So anyways, let's start off with you telling us a bit about yourself and what led you to becoming a writer, and I don't know if we lost him there.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay, your video's gone. No worries. So what led you to sort of becoming a writer? And you can talk about your disability if you want, and then we'll sort of jump into it from there.
Okay, so I'm approaching 40. Have written, I think it's 6 books so far. I've got a stack of them. 2 fantasy, 3 science fiction, 1 sort of modern set cozy mystery. So when I started writing, I didn't know about the disability, but it was very much a way of coping with it, because I was in the process of several extended disability related flameouts at work. So yeah, at first we thought I just had depression, the common cold of disability, and then it turned out there was more stuff going on, which currently we know about ADHD, and suspected autism and CPTSD. And so that's a very common experience, to have depression as a secondary symptom of other stuff. So yeah, for 10, 12 years, I've been sort of diving into this whole thing. Had a load of therapy. King's College Hospital in the UK gave me a massive dose of psilocybin, the psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms, to deal with my depression, which it did. I was very surprised. There was this massive, I think it's running in the States as well, or it was, a study where they were giving people with treatment-resistant depression a load of psilocybin, and it was a very cool experience.
I've heard a lot about that, actually. That's quite, this is almost a different podcast topic of itself, because I'm super, super into learning about that.
Yeah. I'm a big fan. So got dosed with psilocybin to deal with the depression, and then once that was gone, we started learning about all the other stuff. And so there's a stage authors go through where they want to sort of use more and more autobiographical material. And I've been told that everyone goes through it and it's fine, it's embarrassing, but we need to move on. So a book I self-published last year that started writing 5 years ago, something like that, which is called The Hungry Dark. This thing. The central conflict of that book, it's a fantasy book where the protagonists go on a dark descent through an underground city with cannibalistic darkness, and the central thing the protagonist has to go up against is a series of, well, yeah, a cluster of negative symptoms which make her life hell, many of which were based on my own at the time, although the study, the psilocybin thing, cleared a bunch of those out. So that got published last year, to middling reviews.
And this was your sixth book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I've been able to do consistently, no matter how bad my health is write. And I have learned I am very, 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 very lucky with that.
Yeah.
True.
I was going to say, I wish I had that problem.
Yeah. So many people like really struggle with the blank page and just getting the word count going. Whereas, so when I used to work for a hospital, and when I was there, my attention was just bouncing off the work. I couldn't engage with it, which is, there's a phenomenon with ADHD called a wall of awfulness, where there is something you want to do, but it's on the other side of this wall, and you have to like break through the wall using willpower, or you can climb over it using coping strats. Breaking through uses willpower. You only have a limited supply of willpower, which needs to be replenished. And I didn't know about any of the coping strats. So I had used up all my willpower to try and engage with this quite boring administrative work. So one of the only things I could do at the job when I was like staring at my screen, like wanting to die, a joke, but also not, was start writing. Because it was very much like, I can open a document and just write like a page and just lose myself in fiction for a bit and then give it another go, or I can cry and go home. So that led to like me finishing my first novel while I was there, which got published by an independent press, which has since gone out of business, which sadly is the case for a lot of them. But yeah, so because my initial experience writing was the amorphous blob of horrifying existence which comes as a result of a series of undiagnosed conditions or writing, I very much turned to writing as a way to cope. And given that I've also struggled with alcoholism in the past, that's probably a better approach. So yeah, I'm very lucky with that.
Yeah. I think a lot of we've talked about this in the past. I think Roland's written a blog about it as well. A lot of authors, disability aside, use writing as a way to work through issues and problems. So I think that makes a lot of sense that this was something that helped you as well.
Totally.
Hashtag therapy dupe.
Oh man, yeah. If you can't afford therapy, like working through it through writing is there's an exercise which some of us get given, which is if you have people you've hurt in the past who have hurt you, write letters to them and don't send them. And that's a really good exercise just for writing generally, but also it makes you feel a lot better. Well, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your book, did you mentioned sort of adding some autobiographical elements? Yep. So you have some characters that have similar disabilities, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah. The protag is dealing with chronic fatigue symptoms, which is persistent, like tiredness, which isn't removed by rest. Cognitive issues where the brain sort of refuses to function, and you have X hours of being able to think clearly in a day, and you can burn through that quickly. And it really, and then once your ability to think starts to taper off and then crater really badly. And persistent low mood, despair. In the thing, the protag is a witch in my world. Witches activate their powers by consuming bones, and she can create light from any point on her body, which, as someone who lives near an underground city full of cannibalistic darkness, is very useful, but it's also the only place she feels useful. So for the rest of her existence, like on the surface world, she feels completely useless because she's sort of rendered immobile a lot of the time by her disabilities, and when she is mobile, she can't do a massive amount. So she's got the place where she's useful, which is where like she's constantly fighting for her life, or place where she's not feeling useful, which is Life on the Surface. There was a sort of maladaptive thing I was doing with it at the time because I was feeling badly about writing in the industry in general, where one of the one of the themes I was toying with in the thing was art is self-harm, which is a thing I'm very glad to have moved on from.
I find that very interesting because a lot of people I speak to with ADHD is like the thing that makes them feel that worthwhile is having something where they feel useful. And
Yes.
that's why so many people with ADHD like thrive in the service industry or bartending or something like that. It's like, this is, oh wow, this is like where me being able to think of 6 things all at the same time, and it's, yeah, I can absolutely relate to that. And I love the way you put that into a story, because I think people who read that, they're like, oh, I get this. This is me.
I have that same experience, but I went to work in a care home, which made me feel really useful. But also, care homes in the UK are a nightmare because they're all privately run, and so they're being assets tricked by the people who own them. Yes.
So I guess in this particular book, I don't know about your other ones, but it sounds like you've sort of used like an allegory to sort of mirror the real life disabilities that other people have, and you put it into this witch and her experience, right?
Yeah. So I used I use Esperanto when I want to come up with terminologies, because it's a non-culturally associated language. So I called it Cascado disorder, which is just cascade.
Do you actually speak Esperanto? I've never met
no.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I talked
a language that no one speaks. Okay.
Yeah, this was I wrote some of this bit while I was on my honeymoon in Japan. So it was originally like quite blatantly set there. But I spoke to some industry people, and the industry people said, no, you can't do that. Publishers won't take on books set in Japan written by white guys, because they want every book that's set in Japan to be written by a Japanese, but like person of Japanese ethnicity. And that last bit's cool. But the other point of it is their sort of unspoken assumption that readers will engage with books with characters called Mary and Clive all day, but anyone called Mamiko will make the reader run to the hills. They can't possibly read 2 books a year with someone called Sakurajima Mai. No, it's not allowed.
Well, I think the fact that traditional publishing is circling the toilet bowl, one of the things is these rules that they come up with are so arbitrary and so not derived from reality.
Yeah. And yeah, it's well, I mean, the thing, I confirmed with sort of a couple of sensitivity readers where they confirmed that, traditional publishers have what is essentially a slot system for their diverse books. So they have no interest in making the space actually more diverse. They just want to have what little diversity there is occupied by stakeholder writers. And that last bit's good, but otherwise that's just the dictionary definition of tokenism.
Absolutely, which is
not ideal. We have this problem a lot with disability getting onto the thing.
Right, exactly. And I mean, so that's one way to it's interesting, because that's one way to handle. Like I had figured that you had written, and maybe some of your other books had this, where they were more set in the real world, where the characters would have the same disability, or like a regular disability, not necessarily in a fantasy setting where you're sort of like mirroring it in sort of a different form, right? So it's interesting, because that's sort of a good way to handle it. I think it's not even a way that I even thought about.
Yeah, it gives us a sort of plausible deniability aspect to it, where if you click with it, you click with it. So the one book I did that was set in the real world, the protag has an anxiety disorder, which I had for a bit, but the psilocybin cleared it right out, which I'm grateful for, because anxiety is a really nasty thing to have hanging around. And what I learned with that was that was independent published as well. The publisher left a fair few notes on the manuscript, like querying aspects. So in the book, if a protag gets overwhelmed, she often passes out for a bit, like not like where she's standing, but she has to like retreat to her room and like completely shut down for about 45 minutes and then go back to trying to solve this mystery. And the publisher's like, why are they doing this? Do these people have narcolepsy? I'm like, oh, is the way I live my life a little bit unusual? Okay, noted.
The muggles don't get it.
Yeah, but no, they don't.
I really love this idea, and it's weird that I never even really thought about it in terms of, building these things into a fantasy character sort of allows you to explore these disabilities. And like you said, if you click with it, you click with it, which means, what I take it to mean is people that understand those things, when they read that character, they'll get it. They'll be like, okay, this is mirroring it. But what you've done, which I think is genius, is that you've made the book accessible to a wider audience. Those people that wouldn't want to read a book about a disabled person, but they're reading this fantasy and they don't recognize that. They'll just say, well, that's the quirks of this character. That's her power. That's the way she works in this fantasy realm. And I think that really has made you sort of build a book that has that can reach a much wider audience than if it was sort of like somebody who is in disabled person, because I think that a lot of people have their own preconceptions about that, and they'd be like, well, I don't want to read that, right? So whether you did that on purpose or not, I think it's genius.
Yeah, well, so that was the goal. So with The Hungry Dark, what I wanted to do was focus in on trying to make something which could be commercially successful, because I was still trying to get an agent at that point. I mean, I'm not averse to the idea currently, but yeah, that I was really focusing on that with this book. And that was before someone had a quite long chat with me about re-evaluating my priorities. But so I wanted to make something that had this quite wide appeal, wide audience like possibility, right? So, but what I came across was whenever I talked to an industry person, so I had a couple of editors, and a place did a scout read for me to see if it was worth being picked up by this outfit, and they didn't seem to get the disability stuff like at all. So the scout in particular really just they gave me a really long report, and don't get me, it was an incredible report. He made some really amazing points, but he didn't mention the protagonist's journey from maladaptive coping strategies through connection, through friendship and community, and like trying to form a better relationship with herself and her own symptoms, to not being healthy, because that's a whole thing which we can get to, but to being in a place finally where she might be able to give herself space to recover. That stuff was just not mentioned at all, and this was reflected by one of my other editors in the book, the protags hovering on the edge of suicidal ideation a couple of times. And she, this editor said, I think that if this character is in her 30s, which she was supposed to be, then she would have either taken her own life or got over it, which was spicy, because those were the symptoms I was dealing with at the time, and I was early 30s. So the industry people I talked with really seemed to bounce off the mental health stuff hard, and that was reflected in the reviews I got for the thing. Can I give you these two quotes that I think are instructive?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I've got two quotes from reviews that I got, and I really need to say, by the way, it's like the people that didn't like this thing, it's entirely possible I did a terrible job with actually writing the thing. Like, the text might be bad, so I'm not like this first person I'm going to read from, like, I disagree with, but that's not to say that she's wrong to, I don't know, that's not to say that they're wrong for like disliking the book. It's fine. I just don't want to like present as someone who's like angry that their book got bad reviews. It's like, it's fine, I've written bad books in the past. So quote number one is, the book mentions Melita suffers from a chronic illness, and whilst the descriptions of her actual symptoms are very well done, the illness itself seemed to affect her hardly after the first chapter. I think including more of the struggles would have helped flesh Melita out a bit more as a character, as I found her hard to connect with. Her actions also felt rather nonsensical and even contrary at times, which was quite frustrating to read. I didn't really understand her stoic pacifism, as it often came across like blunt stupidity and self-sacrifice without good reason. And we contrast this one to another reviewer who said, my only real critique is in the writing itself, which almost seemed a little too earnest. Starting with the subtitle and going forward from there. The subtitle is Monsters, Magic, and Radical Empathy. I appreciate the themes and ideas being explored, ideas of pacifism, self-worth, fitting in, selflessness, and working for others, depression, chronic pain, disability, equality, and so on. I think they're important and glad to see them, but they felt over-discussed. There were constantly explicit words being put to these ideas instead of trusting in the writing and the readers both to get the message without repeatedly saying it. Now, I think both of those can't be true at the same time.
That's too earnest. Is quite like that's a weird criticism to have.
No, I agree with him. I think he's bang on. So what I did as a result of these industry people not really getting the mental health stuff is I made it kind of as straightforward and explained as I could. So like there was this character who shows up about halfway through the book who is supposed to be this sort of mirror to the protagonist to like show where she could be if she continues on the path that she's on. And I rewrote her as a result of his feedback to refer to her as a twin to the protagonist, and like that's how I like blatantly I thought I was doing. But so we have the case now where the book as published is kind of neither one thing nor the other. Like neurotypical people who are people without mental health problems don't quite understand the symptoms as they are on the page, whilst people who do get it think it's over discussed and like too blatant, which is an interesting position to be in and has left me with a bit of a question mark as to the depiction of visible and invisible disabilities. If my time spent on disability Instagram is anything to go by, it's people seem to get fairly straightforward disabilities well enough. There's a Instagram, a YouTube, a TikToker called Footless Joe. This woman has a below the knee amputation on her right leg, I think. And she's got a lot of content about what it's like to live with that. And her life is complicated and the chronic pain she goes through sounds awful, and I would absolutely hate to have it. But it also feels, I feel as if I get it reasonably well from the way she talks about it. There are interesting quirks. So she has to have a sort of, I think it's neoprene interface between her amputation and the prosthetic leg she has. And that doesn't breathe. It's not breathable fabric. So when she takes it off at the end of the day, it stinks. And it's that sort of disability that really leads life to a character, especially when they're put on the page. But the problem that I've had with Hungry Dark and things moving on is taking an invisible disability, in my case, mental stuff, and putting it on the page. There is a massive variance in how people experience depression, which is a very common condition, even before. And so one person who started 3 thoughts and then stopped them. There's a comedian in the UK called Susan Calman. She's excellent. She's written a book about depression called Cheer Up, Love. And I read it when I was fully depressed. And her experience of depression is more or less opposite to mine. And so when there's that much variance in just depression, I think we struggle to put on the page the symptoms in a way where they're explainable to people who don't get them. So we can focus on catering to the normies or the people who live with these things. And I don't have an answer for that. I think it's a tricky one.
Well, I find that very interesting. I think one of the things that's exciting about hearing about what you're doing, and I think things that have resonated with me about book, because I mean, Craig and I, we're both no strangers to sort of ADHD and things like that. I think it's one of the things that leads you into writing. But it is interesting when you have a description of a character and maybe they don't be like, here are my labels. They're just like, these are the behaviors that challenge me as the story progresses, and you can relate to that because that's something that you've experienced as well. And it's like, but you're right, if for people who don't experience those challenges, it might be really confusing. It's kind of like, what do you mean the character like decided to go off and lock themselves in a room for 45 minutes and not speak to anybody and stare at the wall? That's not what normal people do. And it's like, no, that's not what normal people do. However, that's what a lot of people do if they have certain things going on. And to some people who read that, it will be like, oh, I get it, that's really real to me. And other people will just be scratching their head.
So there's,
and I guess, well, I was just going to say, like, I think the other issue that you're mentioning, if I understand, is that even amongst the people that have those things, there's such a variety in the symptoms that they might experience that they still might not be able to completely connect, because they'll be like, well, I have that and I don't have those symptoms, I have completely different ones. And then they're like, so
the thing about that side of things is disability is a magnetic condition a lot of the time, as is being queer or having gender stuff going on. People tend to cluster. So with the common conditions, especially like depression, if you live with it and have a bunch of friends who do, you'll have swapped stories about this sort of thing. So even if you don't, if those aren't your symptoms, you'll probably know someone whose symptoms they are. But that idea falls apart with the less common conditions. Like I have experienced drug-induced psychosis, and one of my buddies had psychosis induced by something else, but it was both momentary. It only happened once for quite a short period of time. And so we're sort of hovering at the end of the edge of the psychosis pool, having dipped our toes and going, oh, I didn't enjoy that. And so for me, at least, psychosis, which is hearing and seeing and feeling things that aren't there, as well as some other things, it's a very scary idea to me, because I didn't enjoy it at all. Surprise. So yeah, it might feel, if I was to read a protagonist who had psychosis, it might have the problem that you were talking about, Craig, where it feels a little bit alienating and distancing, just because of it's so far from my everyday experience. There's
that makes sense. That definitely makes sense.
There's a model to tackle this, which is to make your protagonist disabled, have a very specific disability, and no one else really lives with any disabilities. And so all the other characters are normies, and so the protag has to explain to everyone else the challenges that they face. And so there's much more stuff dealt with in dialogue, and they come across specific situations where the disability is a roadblock. Whereas in my thing, which might have been a mistake, everyone kind of knows that the protag has issues that they sometimes need to deal with, and so is very understanding, which means that there's not a lot of dialogue about specific challenges that need to be overcome.
It's a really challenging knife edge to balance on, isn't it?
And I mean, that sounds like that's the way to, I guess sometimes when we watch shows, people use that so I guess there's a common criticism that people use for and nothing to do with disabilities necessarily, but when people sort of complain that you're telling more than showing, right? And so you end up have this big exposition about what's happening when people are like, well, you should just show it through your actions, right? But I guess that's the quandary you're in, is that you can't, for this kind of a thing, very easily.
It's tricky. I've never been in a wheelchair, for example. But if you see someone in a wheelchair, there's an immediate understanding of, people who with empathy can understand why that would be a problem. They won't get a lot of the nuance, and there will be surprising things such as not everyone in a wheelchair needs to be in there the whole time. That's where we come into the visible versus invisible stuff. It's
I mean, I think mainstream media and mainstream publishing stuff, it's like we want to have representation of disabled people in books. However, they have to fit very much into these neat little compartments. It's like, you know, they're in a wheelchair and these are the things that we can have them do, but we can't. Yeah, exactly. They can't suddenly get them stand up and walk around or something like that, because then people will get confused. I thought they're in a wheelchair. And it's like, yes, they want to compartmentalize people. And so what you said earlier about, you know, it's not really diversity or representation. It's more like we've got a very particular box that we can fit a very particular type of person in, and then we can pat ourselves on the back and say, like, we've done it. Totally. Representation.
Oh my God. Yeah. I love representation.
Isn't it interesting though that, you know, people are so much about uniqueness and about I'm so different than everyone. Everyone is a different person, et cetera, et cetera. And then you say, well, this person has this disability, and they're like, well, it should be exactly this one thing then. It's kind of like they don't see that there are now the individuals that have their disabilities in different ways, just like we're all different people. That's it's interesting that, you know, people don't make that sort of mental shift. Unfortunately.
Well, I mean, we know this. Like, I'd like to think that everyone who wants to engage with diversity generally knows that one of the valuable things from doing that is we get to experience different narratives, or the same narrative seen through a completely different lens. So it's a really powerful thing, which tends, if we approach mainstream things, tends to get homogenized and beaten into shape. The one thing with disability specifically is it's really rare to have multiple disabled characters who occupy major roles. I was looking through my library going, is any of these books where the majority of characters, at least 51%, have a disability? And that would be unusual because disabilities affect a decent amount of the population, but nowhere near as much as, say, women. But it means we, in fiction, are always kept in this space where disability is unusual and noteworthy.
That's interesting. I was just trying to think that, where does it, because when people have books like that, that's like, you know, you want these people to fit into a role. And I was just thinking, one book what I read, written in the 70s by Anne McCaffrey, who was a science fiction and fantasy author. I think it was called Pegasus in Flight. And it was about kids who had disabilities. There was one who was paralyzed from the neck down, for example, who were trained in how to use psychic powers. And, you know, they were like, it was a great book because he was paralyzed from the neck down. However, by doing this, you know, he was able to sort of quote unquote overcome it. It was kind of like a broad brush, but it was interesting. That was one of the first books in which I read about characters who were disabled, who were the protagonists of the story. And it is a very rare thing.
You're right. That sounds rad. It's sort of, well, we brought this thing up, which was, so yeah, people quote unquote overcoming their disability. Oh boy, that's a whole thing. And also the other relatively unhelpful thing which tends to crop up in these books is the idea that my suffering made me strong. Yes. That crops up a lot, and it's
they always say like, which doesn't kill me makes me stronger, and it's like, you know, God, maybe I'm strong enough already.
Yep, exactly. And it sort of alienates people who are really suffering because they're sitting there going, didn't make me strong, it broke me. On the bad days, that's been me. But yeah, overcoming disability, I mean, Daredevil, the guy who's blind but so blind he can actually see because he's got bat style echolocation. But maybe comic books aren't the fairest thing to bring into this because it's not going to be like the best examples.
There's a definite trope in romance novels where it's like, oh, the hero's in a wheelchair, and then towards the end of the book, it's like, oh, magically he's in a wheelchair. He was just really, really sad, and now he's not, so he can walk again.
that was an episode of House. There was when House was committed to an addiction unit for the first couple episodes, I think of series 6. There was a woman in there who was completely withdrawn and wouldn't engage with the world outside. And so one of the characters just gave this woman a box that had been taken away from her, and she then emerged and was able to start engaging with life again. On the one hand, it's kind of cute because people really want disability to have an easy answer to it. Nah.
Yeah.
So I played a video game in 2012, which was set in a school for disabled teens. And it really clicked with me because, well, I didn't know about my disabilities at the time, but I've since worked out, yeah, I hadn't ever encountered something where disability was normal and it sucked, and everyone knew it sucked, but it was never the most important thing that was happening at any one time. They all had other things going on. Whereas, yeah, the thing I've struggled to find is fiction, because that's my main thing, but any other form of art really, which has this same attitude to disability, which is accepting and open and going, yeah, like this really sucks, but I know you have other stuff going on. And like a community of like-minded people. Whereas in the books I've read with disabled characters, the disability is always something that needs to be overcome. They live in an able-bodied world, which is sort of designed for people who don't have disabilities, like the world we currently live in. And it's just a real shame that in science fiction and fantasy, worlds where we could imagine anything we wanted to, we still just mirror 21st century ableism, basically. Except, well, in science fiction, people tend to write disabilities out, which is interesting. And people have thoughts on that.
I guess the idea is that in the future we would have solutions to them all.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's so, and sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it drifts into being eugenicsy.
I was going to say, like, there's nobody has autism in Star Trek. It's interesting how that happens.
Exactly. Yeah. Have you guys encountered the medical model of disability versus the social model?
No.
All right. Medical model of disability says that disability is a medical problem. It's like cancer. It's something which needs treating. Whereas the social model of disability is, I have ADHD. ADHD is a disability. But the social model of disability says, there is nothing wrong with me as a person. ADHD has a lot of downsides. It has a lot of upsides. One of the reasons why I have quite so many ideas for books, for example, is because my brain is just constantly pinging between subjects. But the way society is structured here and now means it's disabling. So all these smartphone things, like all the social media, all the advertising, that's all designed to work on neurotypical people. But ADHD people often have serious, oh God, impulse control issues. That's what it's called. And so that's just a microcosm of how, like, a world set up not for people with these problems is disabling.
Yes. That's I had a character in a book who didn't have a cell phone because he just never had a cell phone, and then he gets forced to have a cell phone, and he gets addicted to online poker with it because he has, and it's, you never mention it as a thing that he has ADHD, but he does, and it just happens like that. Immediately he gets like zoned in on that because it's instant dopamine. It's like crack.
Oh man, that's rad. There are so few like good depictions of ADHD that I've come across. At least, yeah, Jake Peralta from Brooklyn Nine-Nine does a lot of things that are very well. So, like, he has a bathtub full of mail that he hasn't opened, which makes Amy Santiago have a heart attack. So that's very much like, yeah, not opening your mail because you're slightly worried about what's in there. I've done that.
It's like if you don't respond to a text message within a day, it's like, I'm never speaking to this person again. I'll just remove them from my life.
Yep, that's it now. We can't engage with that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. I've got a buddy who can't talk to one of their friends now because every time I message them, the friend messages back, "What's wrong? What's happening? You only talk to me really rarely. Something must have gone wrong."
That's the way my mom says whenever I call her.
I think one of the really exciting things about self-publishing, though, as opposed to traditional publishing, is it gives people like the opportunity to write about these things, publish them, ostensibly put them out to the same audience as mainstream publishing. And it's just a case then of like, how can we get people to find these books? Because I think if they do, it resonates with them.
Yeah. So my approach, I'm supposed to be self-publishing a thing later this year where disability is core to the book, but not core to the story. And this time I'm taking the opposite approach, which is I'm just writing this and not worrying about how much I should be explaining to the audience. And I'm going to be interested to see where that goes. So to anyone who wants to write about disability, oof, you've got a decision to make there. How much to explain, how much to engage with the literal day-to-day ways of living versus just having disability be in a character's life the same way their family are, for example. So someone might have a family very heavily involved in their life. Some people might be really distant from their family. And ways of living like that is just kind of disability. Like, people find ways around disability all the time. It's a cliche that able-bodied people say to disabled people, oh, I'm really inspired by how well you're coping with this thing, which I'd really struggle with. And it's patronizing and awful. But at the same time, like, they don't quite get that you're talking to someone just living their life. And so if someone wanted to write a fantasy novel with a really disabled protagonist, they might find an interesting approach to be just having the disability be not really mentioned whilst the protag's just bumbling about doing their thing until the crisis moment where they're thrown into an unusual situation and suddenly they're facing challenges they weren't expecting.
Yeah, that's a really... Craig, were you just about to say something? Because I was just about to jump in with a tangent.
Oh, I was just thinking that, you know, it's I think what some people will also have to decide is the idea, and it's unfortunate, but the idea of whether they want to try to write, and this is something that you said you have done as well, a commercially successful book versus one that is more just exploring disability and making that something that they just really want to talk about. And unfortunately, a lot of times those two don't necessarily intersect so easily. And so if they might have to make those sort of trade-offs where they say, okay, I want to make it commercially successful, so I have to have the protagonist overcome their disability, or they have to, or something, right? Where, you know, that's not ideal, and it's sad that we sort of are in this state where that's sort of the trade-off you have to maybe make.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's yeah, I don't envy anyone that particular. Agents always say on their website that they are really like keen to amplify marginalized voices, and disability is in there a decent amount. So I suppose, yeah, because the temptation is to say that the restrictions will come in from agents and publishers and things, and they will say, can you tone this down a bit, or can the protagonist get better at the end of the book? So maybe don't worry about it before people tell you to change stuff. But at the same time, plenty of people will run a mile at something in the novel that they don't get because they have to be the absolute champions of this work. So if they don't quite click with someone with schizoaffective disorder, for example, the lived experience of that on the page, then that's going to it's going to stand as a barrier between the work and commercial success. I don't envy anyone doing that.
I mean, listen, it's not to say that you can't be commercially successful writing about stuff in a realistic way. There's plenty of examples of big books and movies that had protagonists that had disabilities that went on to be successful. It's just sometimes there's that trade-off. You know, we've talked about this many times, where when I was writing, I specifically wrote romance because romance sells much easier and is easier for me, at least, to write, and I was able to write it quicker than than writing stuff that I personally would rather read, which is science fiction and fantasy and that sort of thing, because it would take much longer for me to write those books, and there's not as big of an audience, and it's a harder sell. So I made that decision to, for commercially to be able to make money, I wrote romance, right? And it's sort of that same sort of thing. You can certainly try and you should try to be authentic, but sometimes people will make that decision to say, I'm going to make, I want to make every chance I can, give my book every chance I can to be commercially successful. So I'm going to take these little trade-offs, but that doesn't mean you have to. It's just, it's just like, gives them a better chance.
I think one of the beautiful things about self-publishing, though, is to be a successful self-published author, you don't need to be commercially successful to the degree that you do as a traditional published author. And if you have Nick Stevenson is a self-published author, and he has this idea of 10,000 readers. That if you have 10,000 readers, you can make a 6-figure salary being a self-published author. And 10,000 readers in the grand scheme of things in publishing is nothing. That's a drop in the ocean. So if you can find those 10,000 people who dig exactly what it is that you sell, then you have yourself a career. And there it is, almost like drilling down into the niche is the way to be successful, rather than doing what traditional publishers do, which is try to appeal to the broadest number of people ever. The broader the number of people you try to appeal to, in the end, the less impact it has.
Yeah, I agree completely. There's a TV show called We Are Lady Parts, which was on Channel 4. It's a all women Muslim punk band, and towards the end of the series, they have a hit piece about them in the press, and so they just get a flood of awfulness on social media, and they're all just going, "Shut it down! We can't do this anymore." But their band manager works through all the hate. Thousands of hours of hateful comments to single out the going, look, this person loved it, this person loved it, this person loved it. And that's what I'm trying to focus on with the Hungry Dog, which is the disabled one. So like try and focus in on the people who did click with those elements and focus in on them, because it didn't do super well. It's not massively surprising. Plenty of things don't do super well, and the writing might have been crap, who can say? But like focusing in on building that fan base, getting the people, like finding the people who do click with the work, focused me in on why I write in the first place, which is to create work that I'm proud of, and it would be nice if people read it. Focus on what matters, which is that you've made work you're proud of, and also some readers are enjoying it. And so, as you say, and the bar is lower for self-publishing, although obviously it's still hard to do, which is why I'm quite so grateful for Hidden Gems and Book Sirens, but we don't talk about them because they're a competitor.
We can talk about them, we just have to go after. This, unfortunately, we are reaching the top of the hour, but this seems like a good position to wrap things up, because it ended on kind of a hopeful note. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Michael. I think it's been really fascinating, and I've loved the perspective you've brought into it. And I think certain things you mentioned resonate with Craig and myself. So great. Before we ask Michael to give all his contact details and where people can find his books and stuff, do you have any final thoughts?
I feel the same way. Like I like you said, we both struggle with ADHD as well. And, for me, it's like when I discovered Adderall, that was a huge game changer for me. I didn't have that as a kid, and I struggled in school to focus and stuff. And I think back now, like I couldn't function in my daily work life without it. Days where I forget to take it or whatever, I get nothing done. Right. And but it's hard for other people to understand that. And so that's one of those invisible things. They're like, well, just sit down and focus. Like, why can't you just do it? Right. So, I get the idea of, how hard it is to sort of portray that in your books and have people really understand it, and without sort of really calling it out and being all expository and saying, this is having a character who I don't understand. Well, let me explain it to you. Really? I really think that there's a lot of really useful information here. And as Roland pointed out, it's true. You don't have to, with self-publishing, you maybe don't have to make those trade-offs between authenticity and commercial success, because you don't need as many readers to find. You just have to find them, right? But you know, that takes time, but that takes time for people writing about regular stuff too, right? So once you find those readers, if they become, you know, focused on your books, then and buying all your books, then that's all you really need. So yeah, well, so anyways, thanks for coming on. This has really been interesting.
Hell yeah, I'm just really pleased to be able to talk about this stuff, because one of the problems with presenting disability in media is it just doesn't get talked about that much. So I'm really pleased to be able to come on and talk. Thank you.
Well, before we wrap things up, Michael, where can people find your books, find more about you?
Oh, okay. My website's coolwoodbooks.com. Cool for word cool, wood for word wood, and then books.com. And they're on Amazon. I wish they weren't, but yeah. God, I think you can get one or two of them on Hive, which is a much nicer independent retailer in the UK. But yeah, Coolwood Books. And there's a lot of stuff about disability on there. If anyone was interested by the medical trial I talked about with the psilocybin thing, there's a whole breakdown on there of how that came to be, what it was like, and the results. So if that's interested, anyone, go have a look.
I'm fascinated by that. I had a whole book, and it got kicked off with 2 veterans with PTSD taking hallucinogenics to try and get over it. And then, so anyway, that's a topic for another day. But Michael, thank you so much for joining us. If you're listening to this and you've appreciated what Michael has to say, then please scroll down and leave him a comment, give him some love. And while you're down there, you might as well also give us some love and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. There's a bell icon that will notify you every time we have a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, we will have a new episode of Fully Booked next week. So until then, thank you very much for joining us.